All right, so again, with our little weekly TV journeys, a lot of times we just follow along from whatever we watched the week before type of thing, sort of, there's not a lot of particular guidance to the stuff we watch. So last week we watched Freaks and Geeks, and just listening to it, just hearing myself talk about it, it made me catch on to something I hadn't thought of. Where the thing with Freaks and Geeks is that it's more of like a more realistic portrayal of high school or whatever. It's not like the silly, glossed over Hollywoody version of high school. And I mentioned that the only other show like that I could really think of is Degrassi, classic Canadian show. So then I was like, oh, why don't we make it a high school trilogy? We did Buffy and then Freaks and Geeks, and then we could watch some Degrassi. Because Degrassi is double interesting to me because it's Canadian. It's Canadian as hell.
So is this the original Degrassi or the...
Yeah, so actually I got a bunch of stuff because Degrassi, man, I mean, it's one of those things like I was always, it was always on TV, but I haven't actually seen it in a long time. And like I actually found Degrassi Street in Toronto by accident. I walked by and I was like, oh, Degrassi. I looked it up and that
And is there a high school on that street?
There is not, but there's a story about that. I'll tell you why. It's in Canadiana or whatever. It's just in there, but I don't really remember it that well. I remember this one kid, Joey Jeremiah, who wore a hat. That's it. Very little. I remember there's a girl named Spike. I remember little bits about Degrassi, but most of it I don't remember that well. So I thought, it's like, hey, why not?
Why I asked you about that is I watched some of Degrassi The Next Generation,
Right.
maybe 2 years ago. It was on again. And some of those people that you mention in Degrassi The Next Generation are now parents.
Right, and teachers and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, that's the thing. Looking this up, it's I knew Degrassi was successful. Like I remember, like in old Kevin Smith movies, that was his Canadian joke, is that the characters love Degrassi. Because that's like it's one of those situations where, especially if you live near the border in northern America, you get these Canadian shows, and it was actually pretty successful in America. But I remember that's the first time I heard the "a boot" thing. There's a joke in an old Kevin Smith movie of like, I just got a thing for girls to say "a boot," and literally for years I didn't understand that joke. Because I didn't get that he was making fun of Canadian accents, because nobody says a boot. They just don't do it. They might say about, about, I've got a little bit of a thing, but nobody fucking says a boot. That's where I didn't even get the joke. I was like, all right, whatever. And then he kept making that joke for fucking decades. I remember I tweeted him once. I was like, please, man, will you stop? Will you stop at the a boot? It's such a lazy joke. And nobody says that unless you're like from the boondocks of Newfoundland. No one says a boot. But anyway, that's side rant about Canadianness. But looking up Degrassi, it was really successful its whole run during the 80s and early 90s, and then did well in the States. And then that Degrassi Next Generation show started like 9 years later. One of its biggest claim to fame is that guy Drake was in it. And Drake is like such a huge musician nowadays.
That's right. Yeah.
He's like in a wheelchair, I guess, or something. I really never saw that Degrassi.
Yeah, he gets shot at the school, and he's in a wheelchair.
And then, so that Degrassi ran for a while, and then they did another one after Next Generation, and now there's yet another Degrassi on HBO starting next year. So it's arguably the most successful Canadian franchise ever. And I was like, oh, I never really thought about it, but yeah, like I can't think of anything else that has run for so many decades and is still contemporary and popular. It's like, that is pretty crazy.
Well, I gotta say about the Next Generation is they do deal with some very topical issues. And I don't know, maybe the original one probably did too, but I never really saw any of the original one.
Yeah, the original one was definitely also known for that type of thing. Of like, there was stuff I was reading up about it. Like there was a closeted gay guy on the writing staff of the original Degrassi, so they wanted to deal with like LGBT stuff, which was unusual back then, and drunk driving and teen pregnancy, all that kind of stuff. Like it was not like trying not to be ponderous about it. It was still trying to be an entertaining show, but that is definitely what it was always known for. Is it's the show that if anything went too far, there was like this TV movie that kind of capped off the original Degrassi, where like somebody dies in a drunk driving accident, and it's like real intense, and it's just like a little too much. We're not getting into that one. Basically what I've got though is all of the old Degrassi. I've got one of each of the shows. There was 3 different shows. So originally it was called The Kids of Degrassi Street, and it was just these little specials they would run each year, starting in I think the late 70s. And then in 1982, they finally made it a real show. And it wasn't quite connected because there were some of the same actors from later Degrassi, but they didn't play the same characters, where, then after that, junior high, and then you were saying Next Generation, like everybody stays the same. But Kids of Degrassi was kind of its own little thing. But that's why there's no school on Degrassi Street, because originally it was just the kids of Degrassi Street. It wasn't about the school, it was just about the neighborhood. And then when they made the next show, Degrassi Junior High, just because of the legacy title, they kept the name Degrassi, but technically there's not a school on Degrassi Street. But yeah, I thought that was interesting because, like, walking by Degrassi is like, oh, cool. But it's just a normal street. It's just some street in Toronto. I don't know why they picked that street. It has its own wiki page now. Surely it only has a Wikipedia entry because it's famous because of Degrassi, because it's just some street. I don't know. I mean, every street in Toronto has a certain amount of history, but I don't know. It's kind of funny. I don't know why they picked that street. Yeah, there's all kinds of, info about it, but it's sort of nothing particularly interesting besides the fact that it was kind of a groundbreaking show. It was made by a British guy named Kit Hood, born in England but moved to Canada, and a lady named Linda Schulier, who, she's still alive. Kit Hood died in 2020, but, got to see that this fucking little show he made, The Kids of Degrassi Street, in the late 70s, just like that, it just never ended and just became this giant juggernaut. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. And just the only other stupid little weird detail is that Degrassi Street's in East Toronto, which it does have a very distinct feeling, the east side of Toronto. I never did live over on the east side of the Danforth, or the Don Valley Parkway, or whatever the fuck. But they filmed it mostly in Etobicoke, which is over in the west of Toronto. And Etobicoke is just funny because, like, look how it's spelled.
Oh, I know, yeah. I know how it's spelled, yeah. I have to send mortgage stuff to Etobicoke all the time, like Etobicoke.
Yeah, it's got a K in it. So I feel like that's like one of these little rite of passages when you move to that area, if you're not from there, where, because I just remember there was a day I was supposed to meet up with somebody I knew from Toronto, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a little while because I walk everywhere. It's like, I don't even quite know where I am. Etobicoke? And the guy's like, it's Etobicoke. And it's like, dude, in a million years I wouldn't have known that. Why would you not pronounce a K in a word? And I'm very familiar, because of French school, with words that you just don't pronounce X's and stuff, but I've never seen, I mean, presumably it's like a native word, I guess. But anyway, Etobicoke is actually Etobicoke. And I guess the only other little thing about this is like that, again, I was saying that movie that they finished everything off with, it was the first time on the Canadian airwaves that the word fuck was ever said. So that is how intense Degrassi got. And that just kind of made me think, it's just kind of funny, is one of our previous episodes we did recently about Perry Mason has been getting a lot of views on YouTube. And no surprise, it's a lot of older people that are looking up discussions about Perry Mason. So it's like some guy in his 70s just posted a nice big long thing about like, I'm 70 and I've been digging back into Perry Mason and here's my thoughts. And there's a bunch of, people just talking about Perry Mason on that episode. But one lady was like, swearing, unnecessary, because I'm sure I don't even know what I said, but I'm sure I swore at some point. And I just thought that was interesting, because if you're a 70-year-old who's watching Perry Mason stuff on YouTube, I guess it's uncomfortable if somebody casually swears while they're talking about it. But I was thinking, like, I really feel the opposite. I feel so uncomfortable when people don't swear. Like, to me, casual swearing means we're having a casual conversation and we're relaxed. Because I'm sure
I got to agree. I use the F word a lot.
To me, it's like when somebody won't say, hey, get the fuck out of here. Like when they just have put up a mental block that they won't say that. That's what makes me uncomfortable.
And unfortunately, there's nothing like that, the fuck word. It really expresses a whole lot. Like frig and
it is one of those
they
words.
just don't do it.
It's like, it's sort of like meaningless because it means everything.
Yeah.
It just means nothing. Anyway, but that's
good
really
old medieval word.
And that's really not related to anything, but it just made me think of that when I read that Degrassi was the first time. In like 1992, that's a pretty intense word to have on TV. Because I remember like South Park had a whole episode when they were allowed to say shit. So they made a whole episode of a counter in the corner of how many times they said it. But that was in like the mid-2000s. So in 1992 on Canadian TV, that's pretty hardcore. But anyway, so what I've got for us is The Kids of Degrassi Street, which again I think will probably it's barely related to Degrassi. It's just that this was the origin. So I was like, well, might as well get an episode. Why not? So there's these little yearly specials, but I got the first official when they finally made it a show. So it's Lisa Makes the Headlines from December 13th, 1982. It's just if anyone wants to watch what we're going to watch. Then the first episode of Degrassi Junior High, Kiss Me Steph, it's called, from January 18th, 1987. And then the first episode of Degrassi High was a two-parter, and I was like, that's already, we're watching too much Degrassi as it is, so let's not do that. So instead I jumped to the last episode. Season 2, episode 13, One Last Dance, February 18th, 1991. So from 82 to 91, a decade of Degrassi. We're going to go on a little Degrassi journey. And I figure, if nothing else, I just like seeing these old Canadian shows, especially now that I've been to Toronto. It makes you realize how everything in Canada is either filmed in Vancouver or Toronto. And it's so neat, like in old music videos from like The Pursuit of Happiness or The Spoons or something, and you get to see old Toronto. It's so neat to me now that I've lived in Toronto. So that alone I think will be interesting, of just like seeing what Degrassi Street looked like in 1982. And then beyond that, just see how it lines up to the silly fantasy of Buffy High School and the uncomfortable getting bullied of Freaks and Geeks High School. We'll see how the Canadian take of school goes compared to all that.
All right, let's go for it. Now, see, if they were making that show today, he would have definitely done himself in.
Or something, I don't know. So anyway, that was some ups and downs. So the first thing, The Kids of Degrassi High, was just because it was the origin of all this, so I thought we should check it out. But it was, it was just I guess it was for kids, but I can't imagine how any kid would find that interesting. So it was
you
so
mean The
fucking
Kids
boring.
of Degrassi Street?
Sorry, yeah. Did I say Kids of Degrassi High? Yeah. And so like this girl who plays Caitlin, who's like in the show forever, she was in it, but she was a different character. She was named Lisa, and there was another person. So it's kind of neat to see those actors that become Degrassi people when they're tiny little kids. But it was god awful. That thing was hard to sit through. It was just like a really pointless little like kids in the neighborhood doing some shit. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's so many times that you watch child actors and they are excellent.
Yeah, not in this case.
But these guys were pretty stilted.
No like natural delivery.
Practiced. Yeah, they
no
weren't
flow
practiced at all.
Yeah, it's like just you say this line and then they said the line, and now you say this line and then they said the line. And I mean, I got to assume some of that had to do with, just that it's Canada. I mean, I don't know the specifics of Canadian TV in the early 80s, but I got to assume we did not have a lot of shows. So it's just like, got to fill the airwaves. So anyway, skip ahead 5 years to the real Degrassi Junior High. Way more entertaining, way more fun to watch, but definitely not like the reason I was saying I thought about this show was because we just watched Freaks and Geeks, and Freaks and Geeks gives you that uncomfortable time warp feeling where you feel like you are back in school. Degrassi did not for me. Degrassi, it's like a more serious version of Saved by the Bell. Like it's still very entertaining and silly and like a very cartoony version of school, but way more serious than like a normal sitcom. So it just kind of sits in this uncomfortable middle where it's kind of silly and kind of goofy and kind of serious. That one was just about, I don't know, like a girl who, I'm in grade 8 now. I'm going to dress sexy and just, I don't know, the
Become
issues
the school
of that.
principal or president. But then she discovers that, of course, there's much more to life than being a sexy girl that everybody wants to kiss.
Right, yeah, they got to wrap it all up within the one episode. So by the end of the episode, she puts on her granny shawl again, and it's like, no more of that.
It becomes serious.
Yeah. But that was the introduction of Joey Jeremiah, which, like I was saying, as I watched it, I remembered a lot more of these people. The girl with the Liberty Spike hairdo, and the girl Spike, and the guy Snake, and I recognize all these people. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess I remember more of this show than I thought I did. But if I'm being honest, the only person, if you put a gun to my head yesterday and asked me to tell you about Degrassi, Joey Jeremiah is the only reason I remember this show, really. So yeah, it's kind of neat to see his introduction too. But really, the main thing that stood out to me about it, and I never knew this was a thing until I moved to the States, is the term grade 7 or grade 8. They said it so many times. Hey, I've known you since grade 2. Or, hey, we're in grade 8 now. All this grade stuff. Where when I moved to the States, that's when I learned that that's a Canadian turn of phrase. They don't say grade whatever. They always say 7th grade, 9th grade.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I just think is so weird because it's so much more difficult to say. I mean, not really, but like it could be the dumbest hillbilly American you've ever met, and he'll still say, "I'm in 9th grade." He won't say grade 9.
And then when you get to high school, of course, you're
And then-
freshman,
yeah, you get into
sophomore,
all
et cetera, et
that
cetera.
BS. Yeah. So yeah, it's weird. I don't quite know what to say about Degrassi. Anyway, so I guess we'll jump ahead though to then Degrassi High 5 years later again, the last year of the thing, and it's like this is where just like that like drama hammer hits you in the face of like instead of just the little social weird problems of the junior high school of like, hey, don't talk to me at school, don't embarrass me, and little stuff. Suddenly there's this guy Dwayne who's got AIDS. The big 1980s and at this point early 90s, but that was man, you're about Magic Johnson, he's got AIDS.
Yeah.
AIDS. Oh my God, AIDS. And I'm not saying AIDS isn't a thing and isn't serious, but it is.
It was the COVID-19 of its day.
Yeah, it is just kind of funny in a way of just like there's even a character in the show that's like, you can't get it from this, you can't get it from that. I know I sound like a pamphlet. And it's like, you are a walking
The
pamphlet.
thing that struck me is it's obviously, by the time this happens, AIDS is an issue and everybody is very ignorant about what it is, and kids are going around talking about it all around the school. The school takes no stand on that at all. There's no education, okay, everybody, let's have an assembly and let's straighten out some of this stuff about AIDS. No, they just leave this poor Dwayne guy to go around being alone and isolated and ostracized, so much so that I figured the end result of that would be that he couldn't cope with it and he was going to commit suicide,
Well, again,
which would be what would happen in 2020.
well, I was kind of thinking more along the lines of school shooting time because he shows up at the dance and he's still the big pariah, and it's like that'd be the perfect time to just
Yes, or school shooting time because everybody had treated him so badly.
But that's where I feel like Degrassi's in that weird middle ground, right? Of being frivolous and being serious. Of like that would be too serious. That'd be too much if any of that stuff happened. But it's kind of too much already. Like it's just not. This show is not. I mean, I guess what other show was talking about these things? Like I feel like maybe it did the best it could for the time, but the container of Degrassi is way too Saved by the Bell to contain these big, heavy topics. It just didn't work for me. I just felt like this is awkward. This is just awkward as fuck, this show. And from what you've told me about Degrassi, The Next Generation, it doesn't get any better, right? It's like, big time drama stuff happening all the time.
Yeah, it is. It's very big drama with certain characters who obviously are repeat people in the show.
Yeah, so it's weird. It's like that's where I feel like Freaks and Geeks was a way more realistic portrayal of school, but nothing as much as I was saying last week how everyone in Freaks and Geeks has a bad time, but it's a bad time in the sense of like a divorce and social problems and like not AIDS, not the other stuff that happens in this show of like abortions and oh no and all this drunk driving accidents and deaths and like yeah, so I don't know. Degrassi's just weird. It's definitely I can see why I remember it as a kid, but I never went back to it. It's just that's really not my style of show. I feel like you've really got to be more. You got to walk the line a little more carefully if you're gonna deal with these gigantic issues. And Degrassi is way too stupid. It's way too silly.
Well, and it has a very they want to end on a high note. So here they are at the dance, and here's this poor Dwayne who's been so downtrodden and everybody ostracizing him and looking at him like he's a pariah. But at the end, the girl who is so socially acceptable accepts that AIDS is not transmittable to her if she goes and asks him to dance. Happy ending.
Yeah, she learns she can breathe the AIDS air and not get AIDS. Yeah, it's just but that even happened like directly parallel to this poor Dwayne guy just being in the bathroom, and it's like the worst fucking day of his life. Meanwhile, it's like Joey, Jeremiah, and Caitlin just agreed to meet at the stupid dance, but their timing was off. So it's just like, where is he? Where is she? Like, oh no, we're not exactly here at the exact right moment. Like,
I hate him. I hate him because he just isn't here.
like, it just,
Yeah, pretty.
what stakes could be lower? Yeah, so that's where that show feels really like, when you put a load of laundry in a washing machine and you don't balance it right and it makes the washing machine go wong, wong, wong. That's how that whole show feels to me. It feels like an off-center washing machine that is banging against the wall. Like, it's just not a well-balanced show. But anyway, when I was looking up that Dwayne guy, because we obviously missed all those years of Dramarama and I had to figure out what was going on with him, apparently when they started Degrassi The Next Generation 9 years later, 10 years later, there is a scene of him saying it's been whatever 12 years or something and he's still AIDS free. He's HIV positive, but he doesn't have AIDS. Like, let's clear that up, have a nice, even more nice ending for him. But it was a deleted scene. You have to buy the DVD set to see that. so I just think that's kind of weird, because it must be because it was the same producers and a lot of the same writers and stuff. So they must have been like, that was our big way that Degrassi ended. We should, catch up with him and say what happened. But then maybe they realized, like, yeah, but realistically, that was 9 years ago. Does anyone even fucking remember that, dude? We're cutting that scene. so that's weird. Again, the duality of Degrassi. It's nice that they wrote his character to be basically okay, but then they cut it. We don't have time. We don't have time for that.
And see, by that time, AIDS was still prevalent in the world, but in North America, it had kind of settled down.
Right.
It wasn't such a big deal, and enough education had been out at that time so that people did realize it wasn't just a gay disease. It came from blood transfusions. It came from all kinds of ways that was transmitted, but it had settled down, and there were drugs that people could take and live for years with HIV positive without ever actually it having become AIDS.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, I was a kid at this exact time that all this Degrassi stuff was happening. And, I don't remember specifically how the attitudes of people around me changed about HIV and AIDS, but who knows? Maybe somebody I went to school with watched Degrassi and the little walking pamphlet told them all about it, and then they told me. Who knows? Could be. Maybe Degrassi really did help things, but...
Well, and then a lot of people saw the movie Philadelphia.
Right.
With Tom Hanks, and that really dealt very seriously with that issue. And of course, he dies at the end of it. But that it would be the same time frame.
Yeah, that is true. That is one of the earlier things I can remember. And then, of course, speaking of the big pop culture example of Magic Johnson, it was always like this little, bad joke amongst people, but it was just like, wow, can you believe Magic Johnson's still alive? But yeah, and it basically just that if you're the richest man in the world, you could get access to, a lot of suppression drugs and stuff and, manage it. You could manage HIV and be more or less okay, as he is to this day. So here we are. But yeah, it's like this again where it's just awkward. It's probably offensive how much I'm laughing about this show, but it's like when it's about something this big, like now the whole discussion has to be about AIDS. What else can you talk about? It's like a meteor that smashes into the show. So yeah, I don't know.
They also didn't give a really good representation of, everybody, I don't know how to express it, but everybody in the show seemed to be well rounded. I mean, they had their little, he's not here at the dance, those anxieties, but there's nobody who was poor. There's nobody who said, I'm not going to that dance because I'm so uncomfortable. Oh no, everybody goes to the dance. Everybody wants to be there for the ending of Degrassi. But in the real world, there would be all kinds of kids who'd say, I don't want to go. I don't like dances. I don't like that school. I don't feel comfortable. I have nobody to go with.
Yeah,
I'm alone.
Lord knows I never went to any of my school stuff. I remember I got an email, like, I don't know how many years ago, a few years ago, of whatever anniversary of the graduation. I don't even know what I'm up to now, 20, I guess. But I just got this email and I was like, who the fuck even, who sent this? Who even knew how to find my email? What is even happening? Like, I had so little relationship to that school that I was like, this is weird. They must have somebody like going through like class lists and just like Googling people to try to find their emails or something. Anyways, suffice to say, I did not reply to that email. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, there we go. Degrassi. Again, it's just like, some of these shows where I'm like, cool, I should go back and watch some of those. But in this case, or I should catch up on the new ones. And
No, I think we'll just move on.
Yeah.
I only watched The New Generation because I had never seen it at the time that it came out. But a couple of years ago, it was on at midnight on television, on reruns. And I always just seemed to be awake at midnight. So I'd say, well, I've watched the news and well, maybe I'll watch that generation thing because I'm too lazy to get up and turn off the television. So I watched them. So I did watch a few of them. They're not something that I would go back to and watch continually. But at the time, it was just something like, okay, TV's on, drone, just watch whatever's on. And it was okay. The shows, they were okay. The acting was pretty good in it. But again, it was just a continuation of this. Of what we saw today.
Right. Yeah, to me, I mean, kind of the most fascinating aspect of it really is the Drake thing, because it's just like bananas how famous that guy got. Like we got a lot of Canadian celebrities that no one's ever heard of, or they hear about them for a hot second, like Tom Green or something, and it just disappears. But then you get those occasional, the Justin Biebers and the Drakes, and for better or for ill, the Nickelbacks that really are like so stupid famous. So it's just kind of funny that one of those Canadian mega celebrities was just the wheelchair guy on Degrassi. Not only though, that's the other thing I was saying, not the wheelchair guy. There's always a wheelchair person. Like they've got these right from the get-go of that Kids of Degrassi Street. Like there's these little stylistic things of like, let's throw in some twins. Twins are neat. Let's throw in somebody in a wheelchair. Gotta have wheelchair representation. Like there's nothing wrong with these things. It's just weird. Like they really knew what they wanted. They really had a vision with Degrassi, and it never fucking wavered. It just kind of evolved and changed a little, but it's basically Degrassi has been Degrassi and will be Degrassi.
Yeah, it's
for
the same
all time.
show. And actually, it's the same show as those children on Degrassi Street. That storyline of producing a newspaper and not having proper information, and you're just disseminating it anyway, carried on actually throughout the entire history of Degrassi, whether you're in high school, junior high school, or in another generation. It's always misunderstanding. People spreading tales, talking about things that they really don't know anything about. But you know what? I guess that's life.
Right. And I guess I should say, too, because at the start I was complaining about the aboot jokes. Just to clarify, there's a huge Canadian accent in this show. They absolutely say the word about in a Canadian way. I'm not saying that they don't. It's just not a boot. That's all I want to clarify. Yes, they say about in a funny way, but it's not a boot. That's
so
all.
there, Kevin Smith.
Yeah.